You're live now.
Thank you very much. I'll accept a motion to close the executive session and reconvene the town meeting.
So
Motion.
moved.
Moved by Commissioner Bauer, seconded by,
Second,
who seconded that?
Mr. Persinger.
Oh, Mr. President, sorry, couldn't see your lips moving there.
No problem.
Thank you, sir. Properly motion second go into public session. All in favor, say aye. Commissioner Bauer,
Aye.
Commissioner Persinger,
Aye.
Commissioner Jazinski,
Aye.
Commissioner Stevens,
Aye.
and Mayor Commissioner Cook says aye. It's unanimous. I'll accept a motion to adopt the agenda.
Motion.
Commissioner Bauer moved. Is there a second?
Aye.
Commissioner Jazinski moved, second. There's a motion properly moved and second to accept, to adopt the agenda as written. Commissioner Bauer, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Persinger,
Aye.
Commissioner Jazinski,
Aye.
Commissioner Stevens,
Aye.
Commissioner Mayor Cook says aye. It's unanimous. You should have had the minutes before you for the November 13th, 2020 monthly town commissioners meeting. Is there a motion to accept the minutes? Commissioner
So
Bauer,
moved.
you move to accept. Is there a
Motion.
second?
Second,
Second.
Second by Mr. Stevens, I believe. Properly moved in seconds to accept the minutes. Commissioner Bauer, how do you vote?
aye.
Commissioner Persinger,
Aye.
Commissioner Jazinski,
Aye.
Commissioner Stevens,
Aye.
and Mayor Commissioner Cook says aye. It's unanimous. I do realize one thing I forgot. I want to tell everybody that I was notified today that one of our former policemen was in a police exchange of gunfire last night. TJ Webb, who was a policeman here in Dewey Beach, was seriously injured, and he works with the U.S. Marshals. And it was, you'll notice it was on TV last night, maybe that a hotel out on the highway where there was exchange of gunfire, and Commissioner Officer Webb was shot multiple times and was in serious but stable condition. So just a moment of silence for him, please. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, committee reports. Planning Commission report on 5G. I believe the town attorney, Mr. Townsend, is going to give that report.
Yes, thank you. The Planning Commission met, I think it was on Saturday, and considered the ordinance and discussed at length the design standards, and had, I can characterize the conversation in a couple of respects. This matter is not on the agenda, by the way, for action today, as you know. The design standards were discussed at length, and the discussion centered around a couple points. One was an industry recommendation that we received, essentially to condition.
Go ahead.
Want me to go on?
Go ahead, sir.
Okay, to condition virtually all of the design standards with a phrase as technically feasible, or when feasible, or when possible, such that if the industry were in a position to tell us that they couldn't comply, and they could give support for why they couldn't comply, then the design standard wouldn't be imposed against them. So the Planning Commission was not receptive to including that condition in the design standards or in the ordinance. Another point of contention was with respect to the distance that these small cell wireless facilities would be located from one another, so that we don't have like a wall effect or a fence effect. And there was some initial suggestion that 150 feet between any existing equipment, regardless of who owns it, might be acceptable to one of the providers. Ultimately, that position was withdrawn. I believe it's the position of another major provider that they're willing to commit to not locating any of their existing or any of their wireless facilities in the future within 150 feet of one another, but that separation requirement would not apply between providers. So that's a matter that will require the council's attention when we discuss this on our next agenda. The Planning Commission urged that the restriction in the design standards that forbids the location of this equipment in the front of businesses be applied equally to residences. So the notion is that a term has been included to urge or require the providers to place these devices at or near property corners. So they're not in the middle of lots, not in the front of a front door. And then there was a discussion that went beyond that, where the providers would be required to take into consideration existing views from neighboring properties, which I will comment this way too, and that is, that you could certainly envision a scenario where two neighbors who are quite friendly can't agree on where the pole should go, because in one location, one of the neighbors is impacted, in another location, the other is. So I'm just going to warn you that I think that's potentially problematic. Whereas the property corners is more of an objective standard. And I think the height restriction of 35 feet appears that was a matter discussed at length, and it appears that that is acceptable to the providers of the small cell facilities. However, there may be some exceptions, but generally speaking, that did not seem to generate a lot of objection. When we go to public comment, or if you'd like to, Mayor, Rick Steele may be on the line. I'm sorry, Rick Judge may be on the line. I know the chairman, Mr. Harmer, couldn't be with us today.
Okay, I was just reminded that I personally forgot to ask for the Pledge of Allegiance. So after we do this report, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance and then go into the report for the audit committee. So actually, is Mr. Judge on the line? No, he's not on the line.
He's not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Townsend, would you like to say some more, or would you like Mr. Persinger to interject, or?
Those are the comments I have, but I'd be happy to try and answer any additional questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Townsend from the chair, Commissioner Persinger?
The issue of 150 feet between the poles. It seemed to me that was a pretty firm position that P&Z took, that it should be 150 feet, whether it was the same provider or other providers.
Yeah.
Sounds like you've gotten additional information since that meeting that would indicate that the providers, at least one of the providers, is not comfortable with that. Is that right? Am I hearing that right?
I haven't received any information since the meeting, so it was my impression that Verizon, for instance, was willing to say, we won't locate anything within 150 feet of any of our existing facilities, but we won't commit to not trying to pull a permit to locate something within 150 feet of someone else's facilities. That's my understanding.
Okay.
Mr. Townsend, isn't there objection that they don't want to be put in a co-location sharing poles? Isn't that really what it boils down to?
Right. So apparently these smaller cell wireless facilities, whatever they're called, we've got to get some more standard terminology, I think, than we have right now in our documents. But apparently, at this height, there is a great deal of objection from industry to co-location. So if you had a tall tower or a water tower or something like that, co-location is more feasible. But with respect to these smaller facilities, industry is saying it's not feasible.
I wanted to go back to Mr. Persinger. You hadn't finished. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, see, I'm a little confused about the co-location issue and the fact that there seems to be resistance to committing to 150 feet between two different providers' poles. And even I think it was Joe Davis, who's from AT&T, said during the meeting that we didn't want to see kind of a line of poles at the beach entrances. Well, if co-locating on the same pole causes interference between the antennas, how far apart do the poles have to be so that you don't get that same kind of interference? None of that is clear to me. And if 150 feet isn't the right number, are they willing to make some sort of commitment to how much distance is feasible between poles, whether it's your poles or the same provider's poles or different providers' poles? It's a little confusing to me still.
Well, if I could respond to that, I would just simply say, I am attempting to faithfully recount the industry's position. However, industry doesn't regulate it itself. We regulate industry. We need.
We wish.
Well, now we are limited in this realm. We know that we're somewhat limited, but we also have a say. So it sounds like that's an issue that's tabbed for further discussion and further input from industry.
Well, I'm going to interrupt a minute myself and ask Jim Dede if he has any further information that he would like. This is actually a committee report, but since we've devolved a little bit into a discussion of the subject, Jim, do you have any other thoughts you might add to that distance between poles and what the other companies are committing to?
What I sense from the companies, they really do not want to co-locate on the same pole. That's pretty much what I've gathered from the two companies we're dealing with, Verizon and Tilson. And Tilson and I have been in discussions regarding what they're proposing to install, and they want to put in Wi-Fi to start off with. The question, they seem to be a little bit more flexible for distance, but I doubt that you're not going to get two providers to go onto their poles based upon the conversations we had with Mr. Davis representing AT&T. And from what I sense was the distance between the poles, it had to be at least 10, I heard the figure of at least 10 feet. And that would not allow for the height and the distance between two different providers on the same pole. On another note, as a result of that meeting, one of the participants who had some input into the discussion, who happens to be a property owner here and has expertise in 5G, is a company they've agreed to provide some consultant services to us. And I've reached out to them, and I've also taken comments that they've given, and I've asked Verizon and Tilson to respond as to the rationale for the exact location where they are and why their spectrum can or cannot go any further. So I'm waiting for input from them as well on that.
Thank you. If I understand correctly, Mr. Dede, in our travels around with the companies talking about locations, or them informing us basically what locations they were going to put place poles. Every time we talked about an existing pole and or co-location on poles, they had every reason in the book to say it doesn't work. And and we pretty much were at a loss to be able to confirm or deny that. And is that correct?
That is correct. At one point, I think both of us felt, well, what's the purpose of having this discussion with them? And I agree with you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I just want the people who know who are watching the meeting and the commissioners, commissioners pretty much know from our email streams back and forth about what's been happening and my answers and their answers to citizens who have written in that nobody in this town administration, whether it be the volunteer commissioners or the employees, want any of these polls. They understand we're going to get them, but we don't want them, and we're fighting hard to try to make sure we get the best we can. But we are very limited by the regulations from the FCC, the federal and state regulations, and basically, Mr. Dedes, if you might confirm that basically we've been told you may not like it, but you're going to get it, and that's the end of the discussion because our streets are almost all of our streets are owned by the state.
I would concur with that. We are trying to address it and in another matter, at least at the beach ends, with our Del Dot agreement. I think we may end up getting some sort of a consolation from Del Dot on that, but as to whether or not we can stop or prevent somebody from coming in, that's a whole other discussion. I don't think we have the wherewithal to stop that. I think we may be able to have some more input than we've had so far.
Okay, if I remember correctly, people had their hands up were Commissioner Bauer, Commissioner Persinger, Commissioner Stevens.
So if I'm hearing correctly, there's what it looks like we're going to have is 3 poles at the end of each street then, right?
You know, that came up in the meeting and there's no, I cannot see where they could say no. I mean, the state could say no to that. If you can't co-locate, and if another company comes in and says, I want to put it there, I don't know what grounds they have to say no to that, unless it's a public safety issue of some sort.
Mr.
So
Bauer,
besides-
I'm going to let Mr. Townsend wanted to make a comment about that also for you to help you answer that question.
I think the situation as characterized by Mr. Bauer is a worst case scenario. It's not, we don't have requests from carriers to place poles at each street. However, they are requesting to place poles at the end of various streets. I don't think we're going to have 3 at every street. Jim probably has this memorized better than I do, but there will be poles proposed in rights of way that are not always up against the end of a Oceanside street. And I don't think any individual provider needs them at every beach entrance, for instance.
Mr. Bauer, did that help answer the question?
Well, there's 3 carriers, correct? So if they don't want to co-locate, I don't know how a carrier can provide service to an area they don't have a transmitter.
Well, they don't need one at the end of every street.
Well, it's every other street that we're on, I guess, right? It's one on the beach, one on the street, one on the beach, one on the street.
Jim may have a better idea. I don't recall. I don't think the requests are for every street.
No, they aren't. I mean, for example, Verizon isn't asking for all 22 beach ends of the street at this point. No. The way we look at it is Tilson has asked for, it's like they've divided the town into 2. Tilson gets a certain amount and Verizon has the other amount. But so far we haven't had 2 providers asking to put both their poles on the same street.
But to answer your question, Mr. Bauer, there is a possibility that more than one carrier could request a pole at the end of the beach end of the street. That's correct. Did you have something else?
Yeah, and legally, we have no recourse to push back on that.
Well,
We have recourse, but it's minimal.
I think
what I'll say.
the courts have
Mr. Townsend, I
recognized,
think, brought up that. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jim.
No, I was going to say, Mr. Townsend brought that up at the public hearing that we had with the planning commission. And that, it's the town's position to put a distance between carriers. And they may not like it, but I think that's what's going to be coming up to the commission, to you all as
Right.
commissioners as part of an ordinance.
Mr. Bauer, one more interjection, and then I'll go to Mr. Persinger.
Yeah, so the other part of that then, so when it gets up onto the sidewalk area on Route 1, it's potential we could have multiple poles on the same street corner, correct?
That is pretty much a DelDOT decision solidly over there. And if you look on Route 1 on Coastal Highway, those poles aren't 35 feet. They're exceeding, most of them are
Correct.
much higher than the 35 foot. And that's pre-existing poles. And the
Right.
ones that they're replacing them with look like they're close to 40 or 50 feet.
Since DelDOT is in charge of approving these, would they be interested in having a public meeting with our residents?
I can certainly request it. I see no reason why not.
Right, I mean, if they're the ones approving it and not us, I mean, I think our residents believe it's us. But if they're the ones that are making this approval, then
I
have
will
a
be
public
happy-
meeting. I mean,
I will
listen
be
to
happy
your
to sit-
constituents.
Right, and I will be happy to extend an invitation to them.
But Jim, if you will broach that subject with them, I'm going to try to move on to Mr. Persinger.
Sure.
Okay,
Mr.
well,
Persinger,
Yeah, just for clarity, I mean, there are two providers we've been dealing with, that's AT&T and Verizon. Tilson is an infrastructure contractor, they're not actually a communications provider, so
Well,
there are more than just Verizon and AT&T out there, so it could be that, Tilson will work out some sort of, is my understanding, that Tilson might work out some arrangement with other providers other than AT&T and Verizon. And those would be the poles that they would use for providing services. So we might have, 2, 3, 4, 5 providers. It's hard to tell at this point how many providers there might be in town providing this kind of equipment.
Can I interject something, Mr. Person?
I'm sorry, say what?
I would like to comment on that.
Go ahead, do that.
Tilson is qualified as a wireless communication company according to the way the law is set up, because they are a Wi-Fi communications company that falls under the statute. Do they want to just provide Wi-Fi? That's an interesting discussion, because I don't think that's really what they want. They want to be a provider for other wireless communications, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, because where they get their funds from is from leasing the poles. So they basically set up the pole and they go out and try to get a provider. And that's the discussion I've been having with Tilson. And at this point, they do not have a provider that is willing to locate on their poles so far. They are proposing to put up simply wireless Wi-Fi, like free Wi-Fi, and at some point charge on 7 or 8 streets, which
Thank you, Mr. D. Thank you, Mr. Dees. I want to try to, Mr. Stevens, if you don't mind, our attorney had his hand up. He wanted to make a comment on that. I'm going to try to let him interject between comments. So go ahead, Mr. Townsend.
Well, I just was going to make the point that Mr. Dedes did. I think the conclusion Mr. Persinger reached is still correct, that we don't know how many providers are going to be attempting to install facilities in our town. But Tilson is considered under a technical reading of the definition of a wireless provider. They do qualify as a result of providing this Wi-Fi. The other thing I'd say is it's not as if we have no authority. The courts have recognized that municipalities such as Dewey Beach can, within reason, regulate the aesthetics, but we cannot forbid the location of these facilities in the town. And there are just as many questions remaining as were answered in the litigation. So this is very new territory for every town, and it's obviously giving rise to a lot of consternation.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Mr. Stevens, I'm sorry, your turn there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a few questions, clarification. Mr. Townsend, you said that because of the height restrictions, it requires them to have more, what I thought I heard you say is that they need to have poles within 150 feet. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not saying this, if it was a 50-foot pole, does that mean that we would have less poles in our town? Is that what you were implying?
It's the different types of facilities that they are erecting fit into separate categories. Small cell wireless facilities apparently are not, at least so says industry, not appropriate locations for co-location. So I'm not sure if 50 feet is the right distinction, but when it comes to towers, towers can be 150 feet high. There you would have co-location. And I don't know where you draw the line between 150 feet and 35 feet, but there is a distinction there somewhere.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Dedes, you had said that the providers had said that they can't coexist on a pole. Do we know if there's any, have there been any studies done, or is there anything out there documentation wise to show where it has been, where multiple providers have been on the same pole or on the same location?
They haven't shown me anything, no. I asked, and I haven't gotten anything where there's co-location on poles. My sense is it sounded good as far as encouraging them to co-locate, but what I understand is there's the sense that we got is they're not interested in co-locating.
And
Well, I understand why Tilson wouldn't, because they want to make every pole they put up, they make money.
Exactly.
Mr. Stevens, just so you know that Mr. Dedes and myself discussed this with Mr. Schwarzkopf, the Speaker of the House, and he said, "Oh no, they're supposed to co-locate." I said, "Yeah, but that's if they can." He said, "That's correct." I said, "But they keep telling us that they cannot, under the situation that they have here in Dewey Beach, co-locate. They can't even co-locate. They can't put their equipment on a pole that has electrical wiring and a tube running up the side of the telephone pole, the telecommunications pole. They can't put it on a pole already in existence that has transformers on it, that has overhead wires, etc. It's just unbelievable the reasons they cannot put it on existing poles or co-locate. So I just wanted you to know that. You have more questions, Mr. Stevens?
No, I do not.
Is there anybody else that has? Mr. Jasinski, go ahead.
The only thing I'd like to say is, none of us are experts, on 5G and what's possible and what's not. And a lot of these things don't tend to be on or off. They tend to be degrees of optimal, like in terms of distance between poles, where the signal is going to reach the beach well.
Right.
It's all kind of varying degrees. And I kind of suspect that if rules are put in place that we think are reasonable, but also protect the town and the town's residents, that some of these objections, they may be able to make certain things work. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay. Well, we're hopefully getting some significant help from one of our owners, Mr. Moss, who is in the field, and his company is in the field, and he has offered, and Jim Dedes has contacted him, and they're making an effort to try to help the town. But in all honesty, we're up against a hard spot, the old rock and a hard spot. Yeah, anyway, the old saying, I'm not old enough to remember it. Yeah.
Rock in a hard place.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. I appreciate that. But it's going to be very, very hard. Most lawsuits, from what I can find out, or I've been told, most lawsuits against the companies have been lost in court. The companies have won significant, not judgments against the town, but basically the towns that complained have lost most of the time. But it's not saying we're not trying. We really are. But they know, the companies know that they have us over a barrel, and we're the one thing that we got from him, Jim was able to make sure that nobody had overhead wires, that all new wiring was put underground. And we're discussing now as you all seen from the text, et cetera, or the emails, that replacing the flagpole at the life-saving station with a new flagpole that also is hidden inside the equipment for 5G. So hopefully that'll work out, and we won't have to have another pole put on that street at Dagsworthy. But this is basically was a committee report, planning commission report, planning and zoning committee report. But is there anything else, Mr. Townsend, you wanted to report on that?
Just that the Planning Commission has moved to send the ordinance and design standards to council. So they have recommended approval, and the matter is before the council.
And will be on the next agenda. So we forgot, I apologize, it was my fault. We forgot to do the Pledge of Allegiance. So if I could get everyone to stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. I apologize for letting that slip. The next report, Ashley, is Julie Johnson on the line?
She is. I'll let her in now.
And she's going to give a report for the audit committee. Ms. Johnson. Oh, she's connecting to audio. Hi, Ms. Johnson. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, very good. If you will give your report and then possibly be available if there's any questions from the commissioners.
Sure, there's not a whole lot to report. We met on Wednesday this week. Bernie Kraus had attempted to get with our IT provider to try to get some questions answered so we could move forward. That was one of the issues as far as the recommendations that the auditors had made. He didn't make a whole lot of headway with them. So I was hoping that the commissioners or Mr. Dedes could contact our IT provider and let them know that Bernie is a legitimate member of a committee that's working with the town, so that they will hopefully be a little more responsive to him. So we had a little bit of trouble with that. If we don't make much headway, I talked to Dan Kinney from CohnReznick, our auditors, and they had, he said that they would be willing to put together a proposal to do a risk assessment. I don't know what kind of costs we're looking at, but he said that they would be willing to put a proposal together if we want to go that route. So I'm going to hold off to see what kind of headway Bernie makes with our IT providers once we get a little bit more, I guess, permission, so to speak, that from the commissioners. That's okay. Yes, Bill.
Ms. Johnson, but it doesn't hurt for the auditors to put together a proposal, so at least we could quantify what that means.
Okay.
That's a fair statement. I mean, I'm asking the question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea. I don't know. Like I said, I have no idea what the cost is. Dan indicated that they would give us obviously a little bit of a break on the price, given the fact that we already have a relationship with them. But what that would look like, I honestly don't know.
Okay.
So, but if the commissioners would like me to move forward with asking for a proposal, it wouldn't be Dan's group, obviously. They have the IT side of their firm. So he would put me in touch with the proper person though to do that. So if the commissioners would like me to move forward with that, I can. If not, I can hold off and see what kind of headway Bernie makes. It's up to you all.
Well, I would think, this is Dale Cook. Mr. Townsend, I would think this is not on the agenda for a vote, or it's just a committee report right now. I think if the chairwoman would go through Mr. Dedes at Town Hall, and Mr. Dedes, if he feels that has to contact the commissioners, can do so, but I wouldn't see there would be any problem with handling it that way. Would you, Mr. Townsend?
I wouldn't, and because the audit committee has, a great deal of, is, somewhat separated from council for appropriate reasons. I think that advice that you've given is especially true, that the audit committee can coordinate with Jim Dedes and shouldn't require much in the way of cooperation from council to.
Right. So Ms. Johnson, if you will coordinate with whoever ends up being the liaison and the town manager, and they can work that out. If there's a problem, they can handle that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
The
you,
other
George.
issue we discussed was the policy manual. We've got a copy of what the draft that Lufton Associates has done for us. Debbie Knight of my committee is going to be working with Commissioner Persinger about, going through the draft a little more carefully to see if we can get it a finalized draft, so to speak, in place in the not so distant future. So that's in the works. The other recommendation is the fund balance. That's kind of up in the air. We're still trying to wrap our arms around that, but I mean, we realize it's an issue. The other thing that I brought up in our meeting was the fact that, this is coming up is our last year with Cone Resnick, according to our contract. We had a 1-year contract with 2 1-year extensions. So this is the 3rd year. So we want to get ahead of the game and in thinking about after the audit is done in August, early fall, start thinking about, are we gonna, we'll ask Cone Resnick for another proposal. And if that's satisfactory, that's fine. But if not, because I think, at least from the committee standpoint, we're happy with the work Cone Resnick's done. So I don't necessarily think we need to go shopping for a new audit firm unless, the cost is prohibited. And in my conversation with Dan Kinney, he did indicate that they underestimated the time that it was going to take to do the audits here in Dewey, as far as man hours. And they did discount the price quite a bit, given the fact that they wanted our business. So I do expect that the cost will increase. Now, how much of an increase, I don't know, but that's why the committee and I wanted to kind of have an early thought process on this, so we don't get caught like we did 2 years ago. So
Anything else that you want to report?
I think that's pretty much it. Commissioner Persinger, do you have anything else?
Just a couple of comments with respect to the policy manual. You mentioned that we do have a draft. It has some comments from town staff, and what I think we should do is to try to get those comments resolved with Lufton Associates. There are a couple of things that need to be fixed, or that are part of the manual. The investment policy needs to be described differently, and I think the investment policy should probably be included in that. That's an easy change to make. I can do that before we settle on what we think is a next generation draft. The other thing that's part of the policy manual is the general fund balance policy, and that, as Julie said, does need some more work. It's we took a shot at it. It fell short in the auditor's eyes, but we need to do some more work on that. And there's actually an exercise that we could go through. It comes from the Government Finance Officers Association. I think we need to look carefully at that to see whether or not that's something we should go through, and maybe that would give us the kind of result that we need to get to satisfy the auditors. But again, the policy manual has been something that's been on the last 2 audits as a recommendation. So it really would be good if we could come up with a draft that we could, show to the auditors when it comes audit time. And it may also help to get the new town manager up to speed, at least to a certain extent, to understand a little bit more about some of the policies in town.
And are you suggesting a specific process, Mr. Persinger, on how to go about that, or?
Well, I think what we agreed to, I had some questions about some of the internal staff comments. I wanted to resolve those first, revise the investment section, and then send back the document to Lufton Associates and get them to respond to the comments. And then we would, at that point, have another draft that we could move forward with at that point. But again, I think it's important for us to have a good solid draft on the way here, and then we can talk about how to finalize it.
And you're, of course, involving the committee in that process or?
Oh, yeah, the committee's part of it, yes. And as Julie said, Debbie Knight has volunteered to be a part of that process in the next draft of the policy manual.
Just so, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Knight's name is now Diorzio, is it?
Yeah,
Durazio,
Durazio.
yeah, I'm sorry. Yes.
Is it Diorzio?
Durazio, yeah, Durazio is, I think.
I
That's how you
think it's Diorazio.
Diorazio, and I want to apologize because when we get to the committees, I don't have that written down. I'll have to interject that at that time. So when we get to the committee assignments, so. Any other
I still
questions?
have her on email as Debbie Knight, so I don't think.
She'll always be
Any other-
Debbie Knight.
Any other comments of Ms. Johnson? Mr. Stevens, go ahead.
Just a quick comment to both Gary and Julie. If you want to send me anything in terms of the policy manual, anything I can review, I'd be happy to help out.
Thank you.
Great.
Good. Mr. Bauer.
Yeah, with respect to giving Julie a heads up on what we intend to do, if the contract's up, Fred, do we have any extensions we can do with it? Are we able to extend for another year or 2 years?
The contract as it exists right now, and as Ms. Johnson indicated, has been extended. It's been 2 one-year extensions to the original contract. So you're going to need to act.
We
Can
need
you
to act,
extend it?
okay.
So, and by that, it means that Cone Resnick is not bound by the terms of the contract.
Terms and conditions of this, right?
Mhm.
We can ask Cone Resnick for, just a price to decide whether we want to just reissue another contract. But if we feel that that's out of line, I mean, I think we have every right to go out to RFP again. Not that we really desire to go through that process, but it's the public's money we're dealing with. So
Well,
Well, I think, Mr. Bauer, I think it's depending on the amount of the contract and the terms, et cetera, I think we have to go out. Is that correct, Mr. Townsend?
Well, these are professional services for sure.
Okay.
So some of the criteria that you're concerned about, do not apply to us.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Any other questions of Ms. Johnson? Ms.
think Julie
Johnson, do
wanted
you
to
have
make a
anything else? Ms. Johnson, do you have anything else you want to say?
I was just going to say that's part of the reason why I kind of put it in the heads of my committee members now, even though, we're talking, it's several months down the road, but I just, like I said, I don't want us to be in a position where we were not having an RFP out until the spring, not having them on board until, early summer, and it was a disaster, as we all recall. So I really would not like to go through that process again. So I'm hopeful that Cone Resnick will work with us as far as the price goes, but I did want it in everybody's mind. I didn't want it to be something that snuck up on us.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. We appreciate it.
Thank you
I
all.
will- Thank you. I appreciate it. We'll move on to the next item, which is public comment. Ashley, is there anybody in line for public comment?
Looks like there is a Vincent Thomas in the waiting room.
If you'll remind him of the rules we go by and then go pull him up for public comment.
He disconnected.
He disconnected?
Good. Yes. I'll keep you posted if he comes back in, but there's no one else in the waiting room.
Let's give him a short time to see if he wants to reconnect. Not long, we're just a couple minutes here at the most. And you say there is nobody else for public comment, then, right?
Correct.
Yeah, we'll just wait a minute to see if he can connect. Well, okay, let's move on then. if we get him back, we'll go ahead and interrupt, or we'll finish what we're doing and then interrupt the schedule and bring him back on, Ashley. Thank you. Update on the town manager position. In general, I'll ask Jim to say something, but I'll say something first. We're still in the active process of finding a town manager. We've had multiple meetings and multiple interviews of the top 4 people out of the over 40 that applied. And we will be approaching a top candidate and discussing contracts at that time. Mr. Dedes, did you want to say anything else?
No, sir. No.
Did any of the other commissioners want to say anything? Good. Okay, thank you. Update on charter reincorporation. Mr. Townsend, do you know where we stand on that or with the legislature?
So I used the bill tracking device and was unable to find any information on where that stands. If you remember, we completed or recommended that we asked the legislature to reincorporate our charter sometime late towards the end of the last session. So sometime in, it might have been May or early June, we were able to get sponsors for our bill. But I know those were very hectic times for the legislature in general, and then in particular, given where we stood with COVID and all that uncertainty. I'm of the belief that very little progress has been made. I don't know if there's anything else for us to do currently, but I don't think that, I'm not sure that that bill's been given a number at this point. I'm not sure that it's been introduced. Now, I did have a conversation about the time the draft was sent to the legislature with legislative counsel. And, you know, I know that they're aware of it and have begun reviewing it, but reviewing a big bill like that takes a lot of time. The governor's office, the legislature look closely at everything to see if it's in line with changes in the law that have occurred over the last 20 years. And they all have their little things they're looking for. So I'm not surprised it's not, it hasn't moved a great deal at this point.
Yeah, and with the COVID situation, it keeps everything sort of in an uproar and not moving very fast up there. But when do they back in session again?
First or second week of January is when they're in. So they're out right now. It's fine to have your legislation in line, but it's not can't be acted on unless there's a special session, and this doesn't warrant that. So earliest we might know something definitive would be middle of January about where it stands probably.
Well, we knew that was coming when when it's not going to even be taken up until they go back into session. Mr. Dedes, maybe you and I could take it upon ourselves to approach the speaker and find out what's happening. And or Mr. Lopez. Thank you. How about update on the life-saving station roof? Mr. Dedes, that's your general project.
Yes, it is. Spicer Brothers is supposed to start Monday, this coming Monday. Roof replacement. They think it will take 2 days, weather permitting, but they're scheduled to start Monday.
Very good. It'd be good to have that roof fixed. It's in really bad shape.
Right.
Update on the Del Dot and town agreement on beach land. That's the beach land at the end of the paved road right before you walk over the dunes. Mr. Dedes, you're.
Actually, I said something to Mr. Townsend. Mr. Townsend cleaned it up rather nicely. And what we're clarifying, and I think I sent you all a copy of the red line version that Mr. Townsend gave us. So Fred, would you be willing to talk about it? Do you mind me doing it?
Yeah, I think the main thing is defining the distinction between the beachlands and the right of way. That's the subject, right? That's what we're talking about?
That's correct.
So, this is the second amendment to the original agreement. I believe it's certainly the case after the First Amendment. I believe it's the case after the entering into the original memorandum of understanding that Dewey has jurisdiction or is given jurisdiction over the beachlands with the restriction that we not charge money to Delawareans for, there are a couple of basic restrictions which aren't presenting issues for us right now. But the right-of-way, the legislation regarding wireless applies to right-of-ways. We wanted to clearly define where the right-of-way ends and where beachlands begin, because beachlands under these agreements are in our jurisdiction. So that's one of the things that is important in the context of the wireless facilities ordinance, is that we know where the right-of-way ends and where the beachlands begin, because it has a big impact on who's got jurisdiction over those applications. So what we're coming up with is just trying to clarify that the definition that was used for, say, the north-south or the sides of the road, which is 8 feet beyond the paved area, would apply to the end of a street also. So 8 feet beyond the paved area of a stubbed road on the ocean side, for instance, would be the end of the right-of-way. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. And that's what we specified in our last round of edits to that agreement. And that's currently under consideration by DelDOT, is that right?
Yeah, I sent that up to Eric Semo, who's our liaison with DelDOT regarding these issues.
Mhm.
And he hasn't gotten back to me. And I followed it up with another email asking that the reviews that they're undergoing for some of the poles right now, that may include the beachlands, that we be brought into the loop. And actually, my sense was they should be sent to us rather than them. But at a worst case scenario, we should both be involved in those discussions or decisions. Haven't heard back yet.
Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments, et cetera, of Mr. Dedes or Mr. Townsend? This basically has to do with the land from the end, if I understand correctly, from the end of the pavement, the east end of the pavement of the roads that go up to the beach for, Jim, is it about 8 feet?
The way it reads is the purposes of this agreement, beachland shall be defined as areas bounded to the east by the Atlantic Ocean and bounded to the west by a line established 8 feet beyond the easternmost point edge of paved travelways of the street identified. So we're interpreting this to be, if you go to the end of the street, it's 8 feet directly from going towards the, from the end of the roadway towards the dunes, and also on both sides, 8 feet on both sides. That's the definition we're including.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the commissioners? Thank you all. We'll move on then. Thank you, Jim and Mr. Townsend. Update on the beach match. I'd like to know, Paul, do you have any thoughts, comments, whatever, or what's happening with the possibility of new beach match?
Yeah, actually, I have some great news on that.
Right.
So we submitted the Community Transportation Funds application, sent that in, and Senator Lopez signed off on it. And it was roughly for $20,000 worth of beach mat and panels and all to connect the thing up. So that's approved. We're waiting to get the paperwork back from DelDOT. And then as soon as DelDOT sends us that, then we can do the transfer of funds.
Good, very good. Will that also cover, well, I know we had a problem with jerseys. Will that also cover that part down by the end of Reed, at the end of the new entrance to the bay there?
Well, there's two things on that. So Jersey Street, we'll talk about that one first. We'll have enough stuff to put up there, but there was some conflict on who owns the land, et cetera, et cetera. So I think Jim Dede's had that clarified that that is owned by Denrec, correct?
That's what they've told Don Richards, who discussed it with him. Because
Right.
what had happened was they were saying that property owners were saying that they had exclusive right to that, and that's not true.
Okay. So, since if it is a public land, then, I think those residents deserve the same that all the other residents got for their streets. So my intentions would be to be able to put stuff there on the stuff that we have a right of way to, not stuff that is in dispute over the ownership
Right.
of the land. And then the second part, down at the end of Reed Avenue, we would have stuff, but I believe Don Richards went, and Jim, you can correct me on this. It was going to be difficult to put anything in there from a standpoint of attaching it somewhere.
Don didn't tell me that, but we do have enough to put it in there. And when we had that meeting with Senator Carpo, we discussed this with the Center for Inland Bays, and they saw no reason why we couldn't put it in there.
Yeah, they had no problem with it, Paul.
Paul,
Right. Okay.
I know what Don's concern was. He was concerned because of the water gets very high there when it floods.
Oh,
Who-
you're
Who's
right.
that, Ashley?
Dawn.
The flooding that takes place on Reed Avenue Bayside. Don is concerned about the flooding that takes place there and the maintenance that the mats will get worn down.
Well, I think what we're going to try to do there is that if it'll work, Paul, if we find that it will work with everybody involved, then we're going to put something there because it's a rough situation trying to get in and out of the bay for kayakers.
Right. Agreed.
So,
Um,
Mr. Stevens, I'm sorry, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah. So we have, I
Mr.
mean,
Bauer.
the good news is we received the funding, or we will be receiving the funding through DelDOT to get it paid for. If there's more that we want to buy, we can always go out and buy another panel or two, as needed.
All right. Mr. Stevens, you had a comment?
Just a clarification, Mr. Mayor. Paul, are the funds that we're receiving for replacement or for cleaning? I mean, some of them look like there's just tar issues
Yeah.
when we had on the beach.
And I've had several conversations on that. The situation there was some tar that when people were leaving the beach, they had.
When they shouldn't have been there.
Whether their pets, when they shouldn't have been there, whether their pets had it on their paws or they had it on their shoes, whatever the case was, there's some tar that have ended up on some of those panels. I think over time, just the irritation that you have with sand, I think that'll probably wear that away. I mean, I don't think, is the state reimbursing us for any of that, Jim?
No, as a matter of fact, I asked Don about that. If we got a power washer, and he says a standard power washer would probably have no effect on tar.
Right.
He did say that if we wanted to, we could purchase. It's always purchasing something, a steam fitted power washer. I said, well, and then he did comment that he probably felt that over time, just people walking on it's going to probably
Right.
scrape it away.
Right. It'll probably wear away over time. Well, we can always see what it looks like in the spring. And again, I mean, all those panels are replaceable. If we have to spend a little bit of money in the spring to make it look more appealing, then we'll have to spend some more money on it. But right now we're in for $0, which is a good spot to be.
Mr.
Good
Bauer,
Thank you, Paul.
what about when we originally did the project? I don't know, I think it's been about 3 years ago now that you handled this project and really did a great job, and we all appreciate that. We talked about a 3-year cycle of advertisement. Is that still being discussed, or is that still?
Yeah, no, that was the agreement. And Ashley, what we did that very first year, we didn't get a full year out of it. If I recall, it went in like around fourth. Yeah, I mean, we lost time in that first year. So I think the fair thing to do would be to forgive that first year for people that advertised with us, and then really starting up when they had the full, at least summer of advertising of it, which means we would have 2 years into it, which means this summer would still be covered under that 3-year. And now we can go back in and re-enlist donations and try to get some new ones up there too.
Good. Any other commissioners have any comments they want to make or questions?
Thanks, Paul.
Commissioner
It's probably a
Jazinski.
bad time to hit the businesses up for donations at this point, but hopefully 2021 and 2022 is way better.
Mr. Jazinski, did you have a comment or question?
It was just a comment. I said, thanks, Paul. For all
Oh,
that.
I'm sorry. I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, you're welcome, Dave.
Thank you very much again. We'll go on to the next, first action item, discussion item, continue the discussion of proposed zoning changes as submitted by Planning and Zoning Committee. I would think that Mr. Persinger would want to make comments on this and Fred Townsend would want to make comments on this. Is that correct? Mr.
And Commissioner
Persinger
Jazinski.
and Mr. Jazinski, I apologize. You're down the bottom of the screen, Mr. Jazinski, I apologize.
I'm invisible.
Mr. Persinger, go ahead.
Well, I don't necessarily have to take the lead on this. I think, David Jazinski and I actually did some work looking at the original P&Z recommendations and trying to come up with a modified proposal that we think kind of steers a course between some of the range of comments that we got. I'm not sure the best way to go through this at this point. Let me just tell you what's in the materials. And unfortunately, they're not organized in an easy to understand way, but we have both some edits to the P&Z proposal. This is the actual language in the draft ordinance. There's also a summary comparison of current versus proposed zoning changes in the NR district. And then there's a more detailed comparison, side-by-side comparison of existing code, the P&Z recommendations and the proposal that Commissioner Jazinski and I came up with. I don't know, maybe the easiest thing to do, David, do you want to go through your table? Maybe that gets us into this in a good way.
Sure. So, guys, there are two documents on the town website. As Gary alluded to, the one that starts with the title comparison, that's just a one-page summary, and that's probably the easiest one to go through. It's actually a PowerPoint, unless it's been PDF'd on the website. And it just basically outlines for each of the key elements, and it's really talking about neighborhood residential, where most of the changes are, although there are changes in some of the other districts as well. Goes through each one, says, hey, what's the current zoning? What did P&Z recommend? Or pass, I guess is the recommendation that they passed. And then what might be a modified proposal? So starting on, what for some people is the biggest issue, the current zoning on a 5,000 square foot lot allows 5,000 square foot home plus a garage. P&Z passed 4,000, but inclusive of the garage. Got a tremendous amount of feedback from people who feel that, garages are good. They want to be able to have a place to put beach toys and cars. So we thought what we do is we keep with the recommendation, but add a 500 square foot garage allowance. It doesn't mean your garage is limited to 500. It just means that the first 500 square feet of garage won't count towards that 4,000. So just trying to give people a little bit more of what they wanted. The second area was the P&Z recommendation to change from 2.5 to 3 stories. There really wasn't a public outcry saying, hey, we need 3 stories. And it does change the appearance of density in terms of, well, it's still 35 feet. It's more bulked up on the 3rd floor with 3 stories. And we got some public feedback saying, keep it at 2.5. And since it wasn't a big outcry and the consultant didn't recommend it either, we thought we'd leave it at 2.5. Roof decks was another area. Right now they're permitted in the code. P&Z recommended they be prohibited. And, a lot of people kind of had something to say about that. And, we thought about people who are on the ocean front, or not the ocean front, people who are on the ocean block where they've got potentially views. And the way the roof deck is defined, it has to be a certain distance from the roof peak. So it can't be really fully on top of the house. It's got to be a certain distance below. And then it's limited its size to 20% of the top floor. And, thinking about it, it seems like for these people who've, purchased on the ocean block and want to be able to kind of sit on a deck high up and look at the ocean, it just doesn't seem like it will be that much, potentially be that much of a problem when it's limited in size and it really can't sit all the way on top of the house. Corner lot setbacks is another thing that we looked at. Obviously, this is, a lot of controversy. As one of the commissioners put it, it was very divided. People who have corner lots want relief. They want to be able to have a larger footprint of their home. People who aren't on corner lots feel they want to kind of keep it the way it is. There were a lot of factors we looked at, and most towns differentiate between a corner lot setback and an interior side lot setback. Usually it's somewhere, sometimes it's the full setback, but usually it's somewhere between the front yard setback and the normal interior side setback. So we're proposing going to something in the middle, which increases the buildable footprint for people on a corner lot. It gives them some relief on what candidly is the width of their house. Right now, their house can be 27 feet wide. This would allow it to be 30 feet wide. But it still kind of respects the neighbors who are saying, hey, don't change this to the side yard setback so close to a street. P&Z also recommended tiered setbacks be eliminated. We agreed with that. I don't think it really ever really even accomplished what it needed. And then the last thing is basements. It's kind of a complicated subject, but right now you can do a basement only uninhabitable space. And P&Z said, allow these per government regulations. Well, a basement's defined as being any amount below grade at all. And P&Z's intent, and we talked to them a little bit about this, was really that this be intended for things that are truly a basement. And so if the floor were just 1 foot below grade, then it wouldn't count. And so what we amended it to is if basically roughly half the height of the basement is above grade, then it counts. You can still do it, but it counts towards your square footage of the home. If it's truly a below grade basement, which in much of neighborhood residential is allowed because it's not in a flood zone, then you can have it and it doesn't count towards your allotment of square footage. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Commissioner Persinger?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of things. With respect to the 2.5 stories, I don't think you mentioned the minimum roof slope of 4 feet and 12. So that's another factor I think that affects the architectural view of the buildings that are permitted there. With respect to basements, I think the language that we actually put in the draft ordinance was if at least 4 feet of the vertical height of the basement is above ground, then it would count toward the maximum square footage. So, characterizing it as half above grade would assume that there would be an 8-foot vertical height of that basement space. There are some other changes that we made, and I have to flip back to the other comparison document. Let's see, we made some changes as well to the resort residential district. The P&Z recommendation was that for any size lot, the maximum single family house size would be 5,100 square feet above grade and under roof with at least 6 feet of headroom and no maximum on bedrooms. We did suggest that we accept the P&Z recommendation, but impose a limit of 8 bedrooms for all dwellings. And again, we would have the same provision with respect to basements. If 4 feet or more of the height of the space above ground, if there's more than 4 feet or more of space of the height in that basement above ground, then it would count toward the applicable maximum of 5,100 square feet. The other thing with respect to the resort residential district, I believe, is that the 5,100 square feet would also include a garage, as I recall. And then the last thing I would mention is we included in there a delayed effective date for any changes that we make, so that this would not take effect until 90 days after this ordinance would be signed into law. So I will stop there. Maybe there's some questions that people have.
I do have a question. You said when you discussed 2.5 stories that the 412 slope would still be in effect?
That's correct.
And along that line, what was the, because I'm looking at the design of the roof of the house and hopefully not having big square boxes like used to be built in Dewey. What was the reason for your suggestion that we do away with tiered setbacks?
Do you want me to take that, Or
Go
you
ahead,
want
go
to-
ahead.
okay. Yeah, so, right, the tiered setback is only on the front of the home. It's not on the rear of the home. It's on the side of the home that faces the street. And
Correct.
typically the home side that actually goes closest to a neighbor, because the tiered setback only is on the third story, is actually the rear of the home, where you've only got that 12 feet and then you're right at your neighbor's lot. Whereas in the front, you've got 18 feet plus the width of the street, plus the neighbor's front yard. So there's a lot more space. So it doesn't really make that huge a difference, and it impacts the design of a home significantly. And the bottom line is people were kind of clamoring for some relief on what they could do, and for lack of a better word, it didn't seem like there was that much benefit to neighbors with the tiered setback versus the complications for people who choose to build a 2.5-story home.
Gotcha. Thank you. Mr. Townsend, you had your,
Right. I would add that this fits into a category of several changes that were recommended, including the, counting the garage towards the square footage. And another one, I'll probably think of in a second, that is designed just to make the code easier to apply. So tiered setbacks, if we were not going to eliminate them, we were going to need to revisit that definition, because what tiered setback seems to mean to people is that once you get to the third floor, you need to bump that back off the floor below it a certain distance, 5 feet. But it gave rise to the question whether the reference to setback was the reference to the setback from the road, and if so, if the second floor was already behind the setback, which arguably, it should be, then there would be no duty to set back the third floor. So if we don't eliminate this, we certainly need to dig into what we mean it to do, because it was
gotcha.
really-
Well, yeah, it was intended originally, as I attended the P&Z meetings back then, it was intended to stop the large expanses of vertical wall
Mhm.
going up all sides of the house. And so, I don't know whether I agree or disagree, but I understand that there is a problem with it. So,
Mhm.
anybody else that have questions? Mr. Persinger.
Just a comment on that. I think we had consultants, or P&Z had a consultant involved in the development of their recommendations. And the consultant's recommendation is that we could get rid of either the 2.5 stories or the tiered setbacks, but not both. And so I think David and I thought that maintaining the 2.5 stories would give you that visual variation
Mhm.
that people seem to favor
Right.
with respect to that top story,
Mhm.
so that the tiered setbacks would not be necessary.
Mr. Townsend.
And that was the other item that I wanted to mention, that if we're not eliminating it, we need to get very comfortable with the definition of what is a half story, and that might need some more work. And I know Mr. Persinger is familiar with that conversation, as are you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I know, Mr. Townsend, that people who didn't like it, who didn't like the restriction, claimed it was unintelligible or nobody could understand it. And I know that we had one employee that claimed they couldn't understand it, but we had diagrams in there that were very explicit and showed what it meant. So, I agree that in the written code, we need to describe it better if it's going to continue, but it wasn't, those that didn't like it claimed it was unintelligible.
Okay.
Yeah. Mr. Persinger.
I don't want to put words in the mouth of any of the town staff, but it's my understanding that they seem to feel fairly comfortable with applying the 2.5 story standard at this point.
They seem to feel fairly comfortable
They
with
feel comfortable with being able to apply the 2.5 story standard.
now.
As
Yes.
written.
Yeah,
Okay.
now they do. That's
Yes.
correct. And I agree with that. It should have been before too. Mr. Bauer, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I had a question on, so if I understand this chart right, there's a roof pitch of 4.5 feet, is that
Or over
correct?
12.
4 feet and 12 feet.
But a rooftop deck, does that mean, and I'm not sure how that works. How do you put a rooftop deck when there's a slanted roof?
Yes. So the roof pitch requirement does not apply to an area covered by a roof deck.
Okay, so is that spelled out in this?
In the actual ordinance, it's written that way.
It would be written that way? Okay.
But just one point, even in the existing code, there is a requirement that a rooftop deck, I believe, has to be at least 6 feet below the peak of the highest point of the roof.
That's correct.
So it's not actually sitting, it's not the highest thing on the roof. You still have a peak of the roof,
Still
That
the
is-
peak of the roof. Okay, so just a
surface
short
of
roof.
the deck.
Where's the 4,000 square foot? I mean, that's a number that, it just seems a big jump to go from 5,000 to 4,000 for me. I understand the needs of keeping the character of the neighborhood. But on the other side, we're taking away a right that someone has today. And I'm not comfortable with that because I think, and Fred, could people sue us over that? Of course, we have the right to change that. But I think anytime you move and take away something that somebody has, they're never going to be happy with it. No matter how pretty we can try to tell them it's going to be, people are just not going to be comfortable with that. And I think there's been a lot of homes sold in the last couple years that, I don't think you buy it to sit on that land and not want to build your dream house. And that's why I think 5,000 to 4,000 it's cutting it back a little bit. And then we're also counting square footage of the garage. And you can't sell a house and list your garage with square footage. That's misrepresentation. But we
Well,
call it
but
in our code, that's okay.
Mr. Bauer, I'm gonna let Mr. Jazinski and or Mr. Persinger answer that. But if
Yeah.
you noticed, it would increase by 500 square foot. So it would be,
But still
If
part
I
of the
see-
garage is counted as square footage though, correct?
it would increase 500 square foot if you include the square foot of the garage. If you didn't include the square foot of the garage, then it would be 4,000. Is that correct, Mr. Persinger?
Yeah, it is. The original P and Z recommendation was 4,000 square feet, including the garage. So we said, okay, well, you can have 4,000 square feet, but then an additional allowance of 500 square feet for a garage. So you could have 4,500 square feet.
So that would mitigate that issue quite a bit.
That's right.
Yeah, but I agree. You're trading 500, but I'm of the, my position is that I don't think we should ever count garage space as square footage of any house, anywhere in the country. Not just unique to Dewey Beach. Fred, is that?
Well, the restriction is on structure, and a garage is structure. And the idea here, and without commenting on where the right line should be drawn, that's not why I'm speaking up. But we're not telling the public that the square footage of their garage is now square footage of living space. But what we're saying is, if you're going to build a garage, the first 500 feet of that garage does not count towards structure, which is within the definition of FAR. So the FAR limitation, the restriction on structure on a lot, does include the garage by existing code and by this recommendation. But there is an exemption for the first 500 square feet of it, which encourages people to build a garage, which relieves some of the parking issues.
So it really does, Mr. Townsend, so it really does add to the available square footage of the home.
Well, it doesn't change what a realtor would define as the square footage of a home, but it regulates the amount of structure that could be had. So what you're doing is you're trading a little bit of the square footage of living space for the difference between the size of your garage and the first 500 feet of your garage.
Gotcha.
So it restricts the size of the home. But when you're looking at a listing of a house, the square footage of the house will be reported. It's not going to include the garage or other uninhabitable areas. But that doesn't mean that municipalities and jurisdictions don't regulate structure. So that's the distinction I'm trying to make for Mr. Bauer.
Mr.
Yeah.
Bauer, is that, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that's still, we're still leaving an encouragement to not have you're gonna have a 500 square foot garage. You're not gonna have a 501 square foot garage. You're gonna, that'll be more like the store stuff in and the park stuff in. 500 square feet really isn't that big. As far as, two cars, what are you getting? One car in there? So, that's, I mean, I'm uncomfortable with that. And then, are we making stuff less valuable in that part of town? Are we considering approving something that's lowering property values for someone? And
Well, is
these
that,
are just my concerns. I'm just speaking openly of it.
thank you, Mr. Bauer. Mr. Stevens, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just, a few different comments, gone through, Commissioner Persinger, Commissioner Jazinski, thank you so much for going through and putting together all this work. And, it's easy to make a single decision. It's complicated to make a multi-variable decision, and you kind of boiled it down. So it's a really nice work. I agree with everything that you've proposed here, -1. And I think Paul and I may be on the same page here, because if I understand correctly, if I have a 5,000 square foot home, right now, I can have another 1,000 square foot garage. Is that in town? Is that correct?
No, you could have, well, it depends on the district you're in. That's true in the RR district, but in the NR
Right.
district, it would be 5,500 on a
It is
5,000
50.
square foot lot,
That
including,
you're a 500 square foot.
it would be,
right now,
it would be 5,500, including a 500 square foot garage.
So in this
Mhm.
situation,
NR.
we're going from 5,500 to 4,500 theoretically.
In essence, yes.
And I just think that, I think a cut of 1,000 is a lot of cuts, square feet, where I'd feel more comfortable if it was a cut of 500. I realize that people want it, and I'm just trying to find middle ground.
So,
Thank you. Mr. Jazinski?
so I wanted to kind of clarify a few things. First is kind of talking about the overall FAR or square footage, depending on how you're measuring it. So if you start back at the consultant's report that we got, when they said on a FAR basis looking at it, they recommended between 0.6 and 0.7, which would equate to 3,000 or 3,500. That would be something we should consider. The residents, and I shouldn't say the residents because it's all the commenters, who commented, were very, very divided, as you pointed out before. There were definitely people who wanted the sizes as they are today, and there were other people who wanted a reduction much further than down to what P&Z even recommended, which we're trying to kind of liberalize a little bit. If you look at neighboring towns, to the north of us, they're at 3,000 square feet, and if you have a pool, they only give you 2,500. And to the south of us, they're at 3,500 down in Bethany. We're not proposing something that strict. We're proposing something, still quite a bit more liberal. And if you look at most of the housing stock that was built in the North End, most of the new houses being built that are on 5,000 square foot lots, not all of them, but the majority of them still fit within this 4,000, 4,500 definition. There are some that exceed it, that's for sure, but most of them still fit within it. Or if they don't fit within it, it would be a minor, kind of a relatively minor tweak that they do where they have an enclosed ground floor space or something. I don't know really what we do. I mean, a 4,000 square foot house on a 5,000 square foot lot with a 500 square foot garage, it's a very substantial house for that size lot. And the residents in the North End have largely been clamoring to try to put some kind of lid on what people can do. While there are a few houses that are larger than this, we already have a situation for the existing zoning in the North End. Every house that's a beach house model, that's the one that has the porch that runs down the middle with 2 bedrooms on one side. Every single one of those sits in the existing side yard setbacks. So I don't feel that we should engineer the modifications to the code to make every single as-built house compliant. And this seems to me to allow people to build a very substantial house to reflect their investment, which I think they should be allowed to do. So, the land's quite valuable, while still trying to put some kind of cap on it that's meaningful for lack of a better word, for their neighbors,
Is there any other comments from the commissioners? Oh, Mr. Bauer?
Yeah, the other thing I, want to consider too, if we make a change, do we give somebody an advance notice, or is that the day it takes place, is the day we strike the pen and say, hey, this is what you're allowed today? I think we need to grandfather it in over if we make any changes. I think we need to grandfather it in some way and give notice to people that we've changed zoning on them, that now you can do this, but after this date, you can't do anything further. Then, I just think it's clear, and that's transparent communication with everybody.
Mr. Bauer, I believe at the beginning, and I'll let Mr. Persinger speak for himself, but I believe he mentioned a specific period of time before it would take effect. Mr. Persinger?
Yeah, 90 days is what we had
90 days.
proposed.
90 days to have permits issued to,
you would have to apply for a permit, not have it
Have to apply for a
issued.
permit,
You'd have to
yeah.
apply.
got to apply for a permit 90 days.
Right.
So, but you would have whatever period of time to exercise that permit.
That's right. There's a certain amount of, Mr. Dedes, do you know the amount of time that before the permit has to be begun? You have to begin building after a permit is issued? I think it's 5 years.
It's 1 year and they can get another year extension for $50.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So it'd be a year plus a year extension. Be 2 years.
Okay.
Any other comments?
Yeah, no, and then Fred, I mean, just from a legal standpoint, what should we be considering, if anything? I mean, obviously people sue you for a lot of reasons. You don't have to be right to sue someone, but I want to protect the town's money as best I can. And, downzoning, I think it invites someone who's going to take it. I think it's a matter of who is going to take issue. There's going to be multiple people take issue. I think everybody that called in and had a divided opinion on it isn't going to like their house or their rights downgraded. So, we have to defend those individually, correct?
Yes. You would have to defend the claims individually if there are multiple claims. I mean, I know you'd like me to tell you exactly how, where's the safe harbor? How much can you
Right.
restrict without being sued? Or if not that, how much can we restrict the size of these structures before court's going to say we've gone too far? And I just can't, I can't give you an exact answer to that question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and that's my biggest fear.
All right, Mr. Persinger.
Yeah, I understand there's no clear answer to that, but what we tried to do was to take advantage of the recommendations that we got from the consultants who have a wide experience throughout the state of Delaware, and also look at the situation in other municipalities. And this is perhaps not the most generous, but I think very close to the most generous that you will see along the shoreline in Delaware.
Gentlemen, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask Ashley if there's anybody that online that's asking to make comment about this. I want to be as open as possible if anybody wants to make a comment from the public.
Not at this time.
Not at that time. Okay, gentlemen, do you want to continue this conversation? How is it that do Mr. Persinger and Mr. Jasinski have an idea of where you want to go from here?
Well, we have to, if we're going to propose some changes, we have to be looking at a draft ordinance. We've made some edits to a draft ordinance. We would have to have a public hearing, allow, ample time for public comment, and then move forward as we would with any other process. I guess we don't have a vote scheduled for today, but I think
No.
No.
get a sense of whether or not the commissioners as a group want to move forward with something like this set of changes and then come back and again consider it in a public hearing.
Well, I guess I was asking also by getting a comment from you, asking the group, do we want to continue this conversation or do we want to go down that path of having the Commissioners Persinger and Jasinski get together with Mr. Townsend and develop a proposed ordinance? Mr. Stevens and then Mr. Bauer.
Yeah, I think we're, from looking at the screen, my impression is that we're all in agreement on everything but the square footage number. So I think it's fair to say that those, all from the deck perspectives, the 4/12, et cetera, everything else in this, in what you put here, again, thank you both gentlemen for great work. It's just the number. And is it going from a 5,000 to a 500, 5,000 to 4,000? Garage included, garage excluded, is it 4,000 with 1,000 for garage? I mean, I think if we can get to those numbers, I think we can get to a conclusion on this.
Well, but I don't think we're going to get it right at this
I don't think it's
minute.
gonna happen today.
No, okay.
Right.
Okay.
And-
Mr. Bauer?
Yeah, is there anybody else in the waiting room, Ashley?
Mr. Vincent Thomas did just reconnect. I'd like to comment.
Is it about this subject, Ashley? Do you know?
I do not know. I can send.
Okay, when we finish discussing this, then we'll go to him, because that way, if it's not about the subject, we're good. If it's about the subject, we're also good. Mr. Townsend?
I think it's understood. Mr. Persinger said it correctly, that you're just taking the council's temperature on these different issues, trying to narrow the issues and maybe get ready for consideration of a final product, which you only can vote on after a public hearing. So,
Right.
so we are by no means trying to get a consensus on some of these important issues that are standing out to Mr. Stevens, for instance.
Gotcha. Yeah, he covered that.
Yeah.
And
okay.
Ashley, then why don't we go to the person that's waiting on hold? If it's about this subject, we can continue discussing if we have to. If not, we can move on. Go ahead, Ashley. He's connecting to audio right now. There we go. Mr. Thomas, how are you, sir?
Good. How are you doing?
Thank you very much for taking your time to call in. Your time is most valuable. I understand that. So go right ahead with your comments, understanding that this is not really a question and answer period, but we'll try to address it.
Yeah, thanks for the time. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I have a little bit of a delay here. I just want to comment on the new zoning changes, and I
Go ahead. You're fine.
okay, sorry, I seem to be freezing up here. But I've commented before, and I appreciate all the time. But I'm aligned with Commissioners Bauer and Stevens, and I just have great concern here. And I tell you, we paid a hefty sum back in May for our lot on our house on 108 Cullen, with the idea that we'd be building another home. And we care about the area. I've been coming to this area since I was a little kid. And it's been a dream to get a lot and a house here. And I think it is a substantial taking if you're going to reduce the square footage down to 4,000 square feet. And you know, it's really concerning to me. And we've kind of gone all over the map. And when you talk to people in town, not everyone's even aware of this, of kind of how this process has gone. And we were 4,500 square feet. Now we're 4,000 square feet with the garage, with porches. Now we're back to 4,000 with a 500 square foot garage. So I think there's a real notice issue as well. And I'm just concerned about what kind of thought is going into this. That I was talking with our contractor, kind of starting to accelerate some plans given how this is shaking out. And I was told a 4/12 roof pitch. Every windjammer in town doesn't have a 4/12 roof pitch and would be in violation of the code. And to say a windjammer, it is not in line with, the character of the neighborhood is surprising to me. I don't understand the utility of that provision, because it's going to limit ability to go with 9-foot ceilings and to keep a nice interior home that residents certainly care about. Not necessarily mega rentals that we're worried about. The other thing I'd say is I know a lot of people seem concerned with mega rentals, and one of the houses house directly behind me is probably one of the larger homes on Chicago Street. It's a beautiful home. We were here all summer. I didn't have, that house was rented all summer. The quality of the tenants were excellent from my perspective. Never had an issue. So I think a lot of thought should be going into really substantially reducing the square footage and what people can build. And I think the other thing to factor in is, to me, is the porches. And they seem to be included in the square footage. And I don't think that's always been the case, or at least the code wasn't clear on that provision. And if you look at some of the houses in Chicago, if you count the porches, they are well over the 5,000 square feet if you count their porches and garages. And the porches, I really think, promote a good welcome community, people out in the front, and I think it's really important. And I've been working on some plans, and we intend to have a pool, so I'm shrinking down our building square footage, and it's hard to stay under that 4,000 square feet, particularly when you include the garages and the porches. And that begs the question: if you take your house up on pilings and you have a nice patio area under the house, is that a covered porch, or is that square footage count? And I know that there's been more clarity on the 2.5 stories, but where's the line there? If you use your bottom piling as your half story, and then you have the rest of it nicely paved, and you're using under the house, is all that square footage count against your square footage? And that's a significant difference, I think, from the current code. So those two components, along with dropping it down 4,000 square feet, I think are substantial. And I don't think the code is clear that porches count now. And I think the homes that have been built reflect that. So I would just ask you to strongly consider folks like me that recently purchased, paid a lot of money for it. Really happy to be here. I think we add a lot of value to the community, and we'll continue to do that. But I can answer if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Mr.
Well,
Thomas,
actually,
when do you plan on?
This is not a question and answer period. So it's a time for you as a homeowner and a property owner to comment, and for the commissioners to think it out. Now, why don't we do this? Since you're the only one in line, why don't we ask each commissioner if there's one question they want to ask? If not, then we'll move on. Okay? Is that all right with you?
Yeah, sounds great.
Mr. Stevens, you had your hand up?
Yes, sir. Mr. Thomas, when do you plan on building your home?
A good question. We were initially, really working on some nice detailed plans, and the plan was 2022. But I may be accelerating that as a result of this. I also, it's a great question, because to me, the 90 days is really short. A lot of people don't know about this. If you want me to put a good set of plans together, build a really nice home, you need more than 90 days to put that together. I mean, I just started some of these things. It takes time going back and forth with the designer. And, I have a full-time job as well. And you want to build the right house. You're building your dream beach house. You'd like to have some time. So I appreciate, 90 days is some time, but if you have to get your plans completely done to get your permit, and you have some time to build from there. But I'd suggest a little bit additional time.
Mr. Townsend, did you have a comment? No. Okay. Any other commissioners had a question of Mr. Persinger?
Yeah, this is not really a question, it's a couple of comments. In terms of the notice, I know that the development of this was by Planning and Zoning Commission, and they did, provide public notice, and there were opportunities for public hearings and that sort of thing. And there's probably never enough time for the public to have input. It's always very difficult to make the public aware, but I think they did go through a process that made a lot of sense. And we're trying to do the same thing, and keep this process open and as public as possible. I guess what I would, with respect to the 90-day time period, that's, we believe some time period is necessary to allow current property owners to exercise their rights under the current code if they choose to do so. 90 days may not be the right time frame. We may want to consider something else. And then finally, you went through a number of situations there where you had questions about what was counted and what would not be counted. And I'm wondering if you could kind of put those down for us, and we could both consider those situations ourselves as well as talk with the town staff about that. So that I think we have a good understanding of what some of your concerns are, as well as, you know, a real firm handle on what is currently included under the current code and what is not included.
Okay, no, I'll be happy to put those down. I would just say with the notice, I mean, it's really, I'm a pretty tech savvy guy and a young guy, relatively speaking. It's not easy to get on these things, right? You gotta go on the YouTube and then Zoom, and a lot of people probably can't figure out how to even get on. And just talking to folks in town, certainly some of my neighbors, they were not aware that it's going down to 4,000 square feet. And again, it's a huge change for this area and for the people that have made significant investment.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the commissioner while Mr. Thomas is online? Then we'll move on. Mr. Bauer, comment, question?
No, just a comment. Thank you, Vincent, for weighing in on that, and we appreciate you taking the time to tell us your views of it. I mean, I'm not building a house. I mean, you are, and you have better detail of what this is impacting you like, and that's not our job, is to impact your life.
And I would suggest, Mr. Thomas, to just, in all honesty, in a very positive way, as much as possible, to put your comments in writing and forward them to the commissioners so that the commissioners will know exactly of what you speak. You know, because sometimes it's not enough time to keep going here as we are now. And sometimes it might not be bad to pick up the phone and call them also.
Okay, yeah, will do. And thanks for the opportunity. Certainly thanks for all of your hard work. I have previously submitted written comments, but they keep moving, right? So that was when the law was the 4,500. Now we have these other changes. So I'll adjust them accordingly. And then I'll with respect to Mr. Persinger's suggestions.
Very good.
My question.
We certainly appreciate your effort. You've made quite the effort in 2 months in a row. So we're getting out there to somebody, but we appreciate it. And this virus has killed our meetings. We hate doing this type of thing, but we have to right now.
Understood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay. So I would suggest maybe if the commissioners would like to, that they would forward their comments also to Fred, and let's say to Fred, and then Mr. Persinger and Mr. Jasinski would get together with Fred on various items that involved in this, so that everybody can have their say in the matter, and they can come back with another solution or another possible solution next month. Is that all right with everybody?
Yeah, do we want to make it a public hearing?
Say
Next
what?
one? Do we want to make the next one a public hearing?
I don't know yet. I haven't heard that from anybody other than you right now. That's a good question.
Well,
Mr. Bauer?
Yeah, I would like to make it a public hearing. And does that give us enough time to invite? I mean, we would know like how many people have bought a house in the last 5 years in this district, correct?
We can go back through the transfer tax.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would know who those people are, and like, we'll go even longer than 5 years, but over a period of time, I think we should notify everybody in there that, these are things we're considering. I think for the most, like what Bill was saying, I think for the most part, we're in agreement with a lot of the things here, with the exception of the square footage. And, maybe that's the public debate. Is it 5,000, 4,500, 4,000? Does it count porches? Does it count?
If I could make a comment, Mr. Bauer, I apologize for interrupting. I'm trying not to. I've heard this comment about people not being notified. We'll always have people who say they weren't notified. We'll
Correct.
always have people who don't know how to do something or something's hard to do. Lord knows I'm the biggest dinosaur of most, but the town has sent out emails. Mr. Persinger has sent out emails. I know, Mr. Persinger, you have about 1,400 people on your email list, right?
It's 1250, 1300, something like
Yeah,
that.
and the
And
town,
I will send additional emails. I mean, I agree that it's very important to make people aware of this. They need to know, what we're proposing
well,
here.
but what I'm trying to say, Mr. Persinger, is that we really have made a big effort to get the word out. It's not like the town in any way tried to hide, anything. And actually, how many people are on the email listing for the town?
I don't recall the exact number off the top of my head, but I want to say around 950.
Okay, so the town really has made the effort. I want everybody listening and everybody that
Absolutely.
is in this meeting to understand that. It's not,
Yeah.
I keep hearing that we have to make more effort. Well, we always have to make more effort. The town has made a sincere effort. Mr. Persinger, I cut you off there.
Well, I would just hope that for the next meeting, we actually could have a public hearing. And we could have another draft document that we could consider at that public hearing. I think you need a specific document to refer to and not leave some of these issues open.
Okay,
And then we can make some decisions about whether or not some of these numbers need to be changed in the draft document.
gotcha. Okay, then Ashley, if you will take that note that we will advertise a public hearing for the next meeting, which means a 2-week notice. So, Mr. Townsend.
Right, so the question whether or not to have a public hearing is a question whether this group feels it might be ready to vote on the amendment to the code. So,
I think we're close to that, Fred.
okay, so you're not
Yeah.
committed necessarily.
I
You
think
don't
Mr.
have- you don't-
Stevens,
Right,
I think Mr. Stevens and Mr. Bauer and Mr. Persinger and Jazinski all agree that we're very close to coming up with a solution here. So we've got a couple items that might need to be addressed, but we're close to it.
okay.
Is that all right with everybody? All right, thank you. Then if possible, then we can move on to the next item. Discuss and possibly vote to approve committee chairs and members. I sent out a list and it was put on the web, I believe, and sent to all of you a listing of the committee chairs and members. I had emailed the chairs to say that if they were willing to continue to be the chair and if they were willing to, if they wanted any changes on their committee members, because proposition, I believe, Fred, I may be wrong, is it 139 or 239, the committee and chairs resolution?
I think 139.
Yeah, 139 sounds. right.
139, I'm sorry, I always messed it up, I apologize. But it says that we were supposed to have done this back in the organizational meeting and it's almost never been done that I know of, so I didn't do it. And it has a lot of rules and regulations that we tell ourselves we should follow, but here we are actually making the decision now. I put forth a list of committee chairs, my suggested for committee chairs, which are the same committee chairs that have been there except for one, I'm sorry, except for two, and membership. And the regulations that we try to follow is that the chairs have put forth a slate of membership to us and we say yes or no. But so we have the existing members being put forth by the chairs on most committees. Should we go committee by committee? Is that all right with you guys? And I can read it off and then we could have a motion to accept that committee as read. Let me start with the audit committee. Julie Johnson, chair. Members Donna Alexandra, Debbie Knight Diorzo, Bernie Kraus, Janine Stevens, and Commissioner Liaison Gary Persinger. And do I have a motion to accept as read? Mr. Stevens, so
Motion.
moved.
So moved.
There's a second.
Second,
Mr. Bauer, second. And I'll call the roll. Is there any further discussion? I'll call the roll on that. Mr. Bauer, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Persinger, how do you vote?
aye.
Mr. Stevens, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Jazinski, how do you vote?
Aye.
And I, as mayor commissioner, vote aye also. So it passes unanimously. Budget and Finance Committee. This is one that had a little bit of a change because somebody got elected. Mr.
Right.
Stevens used to be chair and he's now an elected commissioner. So at your agreement, I temporarily installed Dave Davis as chair of that committee, and he has said he'd like to remain chair, and the following people who are on the committee already would like to remain on. Dave Davis, Jill Campello, Nancy McCloskey, James Pergaki, Lynn Winkler, Phil Winkler. And the only one I'm not sure of is Joe Kinley has been on as a non-voting member. I'm not quite sure what that is. So I'll have to check that. I really don't understand it. With Commissioner Liaison William Stevens, hooray for Mr. Stevens. We're going to give him a lot of these jobs. Do I hear Mr. Bauer?
I was going to motion, but yeah, I mean, I don't understand what a non-voting member is.
I don't either, and we'll leave that open and I'll take care of it. I promise.
My only thought on this committee is that there's 6 and it should be an odd number in case there's any ties on votes.
Okay, you're right. We'll have to.
I think I don't think we should have that restriction.
Well, it's not a restriction. I think it's a suggestion more than a restriction.
Well-
It's a suggestion that we have odd numbers for voting.
Yeah, but
Right.
it depends on who shows up. You could have an even number of people show up for a meeting.
That's right.
That's right.
You know,
could have
it
3.
doesn't- I don't think it really matters. I
So
think
you
There's
it's-
need
a
to have
motion
4
to-
of the, yeah. you
There's a
need to have
motion
4 of the
by
6.
Mr. Bauer to accept the group as read. Is there a second?
I second.
Second by Commissioner Persinger. Mr. Bauer, is there any further discussion? Mr. Bauer, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Persinger,
Aye,
Mr. Stevens,
Aye.
Mr. Jazinski,
Aye.
and as Mayor Commissioner, I vote aye also. It's unanimous. Charter and Code Ad Hoc Committee. We do not have a chair for this. I was just notified not too long ago, myself and Mr. Persinger were notified that the chair can no longer be the chair, but we do have members, so we have to decide. We have to come up with somebody to be a chair, and I'll work with the committee and see if any of them would like to be a chairman. And then I'll work with Mr. Persinger to work it out also. But the committee members are Julie Johnson, Marcia Scheck, Jimmy O'Connor, Elaine Bowl, and Jim Dede's ad hoc because he worked for the town. And then Commissioner Liaison Gary Persinger. Do I have a motion to accept as read?
so moved.
Who was that?
I,
Mr. Persinger. Mr. Bauer, do you second? You second? Any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Bauer, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Persinger, how do you vote?
aye,
Mr. Stevens, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Jazinski, how do you vote?
Aye.
And I, as mayor chair, vote aye also unanimously. Ashley's just writing away here. Comprehensive Development Committee. Present chair is Dave Davis. Members Jimmy O'Connor, Julie Johnson, Phil Winkler, and Commissioner Liaison Gary Persinger. Do I have a motion to accept as read?
Motion.
Mr. Bauer, motion to accept. Is there a second?
second,
Mr. Persinger, second. It's properly motioned in second. We'll hold the vote. Commissioner Bauer, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Persinger,
aye,
Commissioner Stevens,
Aye.
Commissioner Jazinski,
Aye.
and myself as mayor commissioner, I vote aye. It's unanimous. Infrastructure Committee, Chair Jim Tyler, members Steve Hughes, Marlene Tarr, Peter Bricotto, Drew Martin. Commissioner Liaison, myself, Dale Cook. Is there a motion to accept as read? So moved by Mr. Stevens. And a
Second.
second
So
by
moved.
Mr. Persinger. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Bauer, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Persinger, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Stevens, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Jazinski, how do you vote?
Aye.
And, excuse me, as mayor commissioner, I vote aye too, to make it unanimous. Investment Committee, I just have one comment before I read the members off. I messed up because Mr. Bauer had somebody that would possibly like to be on the committee, and he and I spoke before this. We're going to put their name in through the chair at the next meeting. So presently, the investment chair is Brian Prevor. That's a new chair. Members Jimmy Lee, Michael Schaefer, Dennis Trencher, Bernie Cross, and Commissioner Liaison, Mr. Stevens. And that chair was a prior member of the committee and volunteered to be chair, and the other committee members said they would assist him. So do I hear a motion to accept as read, Mr. Stevens?
Well, just
So
one
moved.
comment. Mr. Mayor, what's on the website does have Christine Cooper on there.
Yeah,
Just
that's
didn't want-
right.
Oh,
So you
I'm
you
sorry.
didn't mess up.
So you
I'm
didn't mess
sorry.
At
up.
all.
well, I didn't mess up. I don't know how
No,
I
you
got
messed
on
up
there,
by
but-
saying you messed up, but you didn't really mess up.
Okay, I don't know who told who what, but that's great, including Christine Cooper.
You
Yes,
just can't remember that you didn't mess
Liaison,
up.
Mr. Stevens.
so moved.
And is there a motion to accept as read? Mr. Persinger, accept the motion as read. Is there a second?
Uh,
Mr. Bauer, second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Bauer, how do you
Vote
vote?
aye.
Aye. Mr. Persinger, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Stevens, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Jazinski, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Mr. Cook, as mayor commissioner, I vote aye, make it unanimous. Marketing and Events Committee, Chair Drew Martin, members Ellen Blocker, Alex Hanna, Gil Hoffheimer, Kelly Raniere, and Janine Stevens. I know that name. Commissioner Liaison Paul Bauer. Is there a motion to accept as read?
So moved.
Mr. Persinger moved. Is there a second? Mr. Stevens, second. Any further discussion? Mr. Bauer, I call the question. Mr. Bauer, how do you vote?
Vote aye.
Excuse me?
I vote aye.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Persinger, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Stevens, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Jazinski, how do you vote?
Aye.
And myself as mayor commissioner vote aye to make it unanimous. Mr. Bauer, you have a full committee again.
All right.
All right. That covers all that area. Is there any comments or questions anybody has in that, Mr. Stevens?
How come Mr. Jazinski doesn't have any liaison duties?
Well, we've discussed that earlier, and Mr. Persinger, did you want to make a comment?
Well, I do. I don't think that liaisons are really require approval of all the commissioners. I think that's probably up to you, the mayor. So I mean, I would think we can go back and revisit the liaison assignments and see if we can carve something out for Commissioner Jazinski.
I'll get,
Yeah,
I'll go over
to-
that again. Mr. Jazinski says he's more than willing to volunteer for any committee.
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Next item is discuss possible implementation of a building permit application fee per section 93(1)(c) of the code of the town of Dewey Beach. And again, before Mr. Didi speaks about this is something that's already in existence, had been in existence. And when it got changed, it never got enforced again. It got changed in 2005. It was in existence before that. I believe Mr. Didi was it 97 or 93 that it was instituted. Mr. Didi, your mic is off. Mr. Didi, you still need to, there you go.
Yeah,
Was it 90? I think it was originally, it was in the 90s anyway, when it was originated. and it
It was
was
definitely in
changed.
the 90s.
It was changed in 2005, but from that time, it has not been required when they turn in the application. It was not required as a fee. Somebody forgot it. So, Mr. Dedes, go ahead.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I think you took the issue at task here. Under Ordinance 527, which was adopted in 2005, and it impacted what you all have on Chapter 93 fees under C. What we're talking about is an application fee, simply turning in an application that if a minimum would be $50. So if for example, if they have a construction cost estimated of $5,000, the fee would be 3% of that. That would be $150. So if it's under $150, the town should be charging $50 for the application. Once they get their permit, then we would charge the additional, whatever the cost would be, up to $5,000 for that, for the $50 application fee. Anything over the $150 permit fee, we would charge $150 for an application. Now, to my knowledge, we've never collected it. Since the building inspector and I had nothing better to do, we decided we would look at some of the code issues. And this is one that was glaring. We've seen it before. We've just not done anything about it. And I guess the question really comes down to is, I think we would like a little direction here. I don't feel that it's appropriate all of a sudden to start charging a fee that we haven't done in years, but it is part of our code. It is an ordinance, and I feel we need to address this at some point. My suggestion is that if we were to begin charging it, I would hold off till probably the beginning of April. I was originally thinking January, but I think people need to know that this may be coming up and start at beginning our new fiscal year. If the sense of the commissioners is, we want to revisit this ordinance at some point, we may want to change this. So I did some calculations, and since April of this year, if we charge an application fee, we would have had 49 applications that would have only been charged $50. And that would take us from April through November. And we had 106 applications that came in that would have been charged over $150. And the net to the increase in application fees or funding for the town would have been so far this year a little over $18,000. So I just bring that up as background information. Had we done this year? That's where I stand, and any guidance you wish to give us, we would be greatly appreciative.
I want to make one comment before I move to Mr. Bauer, who had his hand up. It's a fee that we should have been charging. We weren't by
That's
mistake. It simply got forgotten. In these times when the town is in, pretty bad straits, we can't forget to collect anything that's really owed to the town. But Jim was right in saying that, we just can't just start it. At least in my opinion, I think he's correct. I think we ought to think seriously about it. And I don't think it's a bad fee. It's not onerous. It's not something that other governments don't already have. That's why the town had it in its code. It just got forgotten. And we have to think about what we need. Mr. Bauer, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to wait till April. I mean, maybe January 1st. Let's start doing it. It's something that's on our books now that we should have been doing. I don't think we have to do anything else but start enforcing what we've already approved. So, how many dollars, Jim, did we miss out on?
A little over 18,000 so far.
I mean, that's significant money, and we don't really we don't get a lot of permits in April, May, June, July, and then we get some. Then again in September we start collecting it. So really, I don't want to push off till next September. A revenue that maybe there's another $18,000, and hey, we didn't go through the best year. I mean, we survived this year, but I think we need to be, collecting everything that we've already approved.
Mr. Jazinski?
Jim, I thought when you applied for a building permit, you had to attach a check for the full amount of the permit fee with your application. Isn't that correct?
No, we don't ask for it right away. Depends on a couple of things. One, whether the permit application has to go to the county first, because we want to make sure the county permit is applied for and paid for. And then the permit process, it comes back to us. At that point, we will issue a permit for those who have to go to the county. Normally, we take an application, we take a look at it, get back to people. And once we issue the permit, we let them know that what the permit fee is.
Okay, so doesn't the permit application currently say that you have to include a check?
I'm not sure. I
think it does.
If it does, we wait till we issue a permit to accept it.
It probably meant this fee originally, and then
It very
got
well may have,
forgotten.
but
Okay. All right. So I guess my question is, does the application fee count towards the total 3% permit fee, or is it in addition to it?
it's an additional fee.
Okay.
Any other questions from the commissioner? Mr. Persinger?
Yeah, I almost view this fee to file a permit almost as a nuisance fee. I realize the total is worth $18,000, but I might opt for some sort of middle ground here. If you're talking about a small job, less than $5,000, what you're doing is you're basically doubling the permit fee from $50 to $100. I think I would probably drop the application fee for any project under $5,000 and maybe continue it for projects that are bigger than that, since those presumably are going to be a little bit more complex and a little bit more effort to review. But I don't want to discourage anybody from filing for a building permit. I'm sure there's still some construction work that goes on for which people don't file a permit. But I don't think it makes sense to, in essence, double the fee for a job that's less than $5,000.
Good comment. Any other comments from anybody? Mr. Stevens, go ahead.
I agree with Commissioner Persinger.
All right. Then I guess the idea might be then if we give permission to collect the fee as Mr. Bauer suggested, start collecting the fee, but next month have a discuss and vote on changing the cost of it. Does that sound?
Yeah.
I think that sounds good. Mr. Persinger, that we could discuss your ideas we could make a change in the fee structure.
Well, if you're going to start collecting it, why wouldn't you wait till February 1st and make this set up January as a definitive decision one way or the other?
That's fine. That's a fine idea.
Have a draft ordinance. We're not talking about, big drafting effort here. It's pretty simple.
Okay.
That's
And
a
I think
fine
that's-
idea. Go
I
ahead,
think that's
Mr.
very
Bauer.
fair, Gary. I agree with you. Charging a permit for a small job.
All right, how about we do this? How about Mr. Persinger? Well, everybody can, but Mr. Persinger, if you'll get together with Mr. Townsend and discuss your thoughts on it, while everybody can send Mr. Townsend their thoughts on it, and then if you have any or want any changes, and then we'll go with that schedule. Is that all right?
Yep.
Mr. Dedes, is that all right?
Perfectly fine. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on maybe to the next item then. Item number 4, review fiscal year 2021 budget status to include November financials and COVID-19 budget scenario. Mr. Dedes, all yours.
Thank you. The good news is we're doing very well considering we're in a COVID situation in general. Our expected revenue for November was $167,000. We got $246,000 in revenue, mainly because of our wonderful transfer tax. So where the difference was $78,000 additional funds came in. Expenses for November were expected to be around 219,000. We're right on target. We're a little bit over by $331. 220,000 came in. The year-to-date revenue that was expected was $2,985,990. Actual year-to-date revenue was $3,014,576. So we're ahead by 28,500 some dollars. Year-to-date expenses, we projected 2,620,000. We actually came in at 2,478,000 for expenses. So we're actually below by $142,000. Set-asides, we expected 110,000 for set-asides, and the actual year-to-date set-aside was 129,000. And of course, that's because of the transfer taxes that came in. COVID scenarios, I did ask Sheena to take out the worst case scenarios. We're not there. I don't think we're going to be there. I think that we're going to be coming close to meeting the budget this year if things continue. But we're going to have to take it month to month. But transfer tax does still seem to be coming on, not as much as we expected, as we anticipated last month, but certainly I think we're going to come into close to 80 or 90 additional thousand for December. So I would say that we're doing pretty well so far, and I don't expect any major surprises at this point. So I think our COVID budget really it's going to show that we're going to come in with a slight deficit, but certainly not to those worst case scenarios that we looked at, and probably in the neighborhood of maybe $30,000 to $50,000 based upon today's the anticipated the revenue that we've gotten so far.
Mr. Dedes, you have
That's
further
it.
comments?
No, Sheena, if you want to jump in, you're most welcome.
Actually, you covered it all very nicely.
All right.
The first I've ever heard of you telling me.
Me
That's the
too.
first time.
Questions and comments, Mr. Persinger?
Yeah, I would tend to agree that I think we have a real good shot at coming in pretty close to budget, but I think we're going to need probably another 30% over what we originally budgeted from transfer tax. And that's a lot, and it would take us up over $1 million for transfer tax this year. But I did a quick scan of Redfin last night.
Mhm.
There's a total of about $28 million in properties that are currently under contract. Some of them are contingent, some of them are pending. And 1.5%, that would generate another $400,000. So that all wouldn't certainly come in over this period of time through the end of March. But I think it does indicate that we have a good shot at actually getting to that figure that's somewhat over $1 million for transfer tax.
When I was looking at my numbers, I took my numbers based on last year. I took what we received last year for my projections for the last 4 months, and we hit the $1 million, and we're already over that for December.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I got distracted for a moment with another issue. So I'm sorry.
When I
Sheena,
did
could
the
you repeat
projection
that?
for the rest of the year, I did it based on what we actually received last year. And we've already beat that for December. We beat December's 2019 with what we're getting this month, what's already in our bank account. So if we get exactly what we received last year, we're going to hit that $1 million.
Right.
Thank you, Sheena.
Any other questions, comments? Hearing none. Well, Jim, Sheena, thank you very much.
Good job, guys.
Yep, excellent.
Thank you, Bill.
All right, next item, number 5, review of fiscal year 2022 budget status. Jim?
Well, that's still in progress. I know Bill has been working with Sheena, and there are some proposals that are coming in initially, which are going to be presented to the Budget and Finance Committee. And we are, I've asked Sheena to present two for a flat budget for what we had this year, and one to go to for 2, 3, 4, and 5% budget increases to see how that stands. And this will be the first time also in the 2022 budget that we are going to be putting in a capital improvement and expenditure budget as well. That's still going on. Bill has really been a great help. Bill, I know you and Sheena have done a really nice job, and I just want to thank you for the time that you spend, your expertise. So that's still work in progress, and Budget and Finance is going to get it tomorrow to take a look at.
Any questions, comments from the commissioners? Hearing none. Excuse me? Nope.
So we're in good shape.
The next item is something that's been passed on a couple times because of COVID. Discuss Bay Beach rules and possibly schedule a workshop. We come down each time, although I'm not saying we shouldn't discuss them, but we come down each time to saying, you know, when can we schedule a workshop? Well, COVID's a problem. We want to give it a chance, give it time, and we've never scheduled a workshop. Jim, I believe you talked to
I talked to Bill Lauer, representing Harvey Haney Associates and DVE, and I think I sent you Bill's comments, but Bill and I chatted, and he really feels we ought to hold off a little bit before we adopt any standards, and he really feels that we need a person-to-person discussion on this. So, but he would like to see a workshop also, that everybody could participate in. We know we've already had one set of comments made and suggestions by the former town manager and representatives of Dewey Beach Enterprises. And I think, Mayor, you had some additional comments.
yeah, they've been published the last 2 months.
Right. And I think Gary, Mr. Persinger, recommended some time ago that we go to a workshop. And I think that's a great idea. I think we need to get some more input. I also talked to one of the principals with Dewey Beach Enterprises, and that was Mr. Kennard some time ago, Mike Kennard. And his feeling was we should just simply adopt the rules of the ocean and just embellish at least for the beach area, and then and do some embellishment for the Baywalk area. So those are the only comments I've had.
Mr. Persinger, you had your hand up?
Yeah, well, I thought when we discussed this the last time, I thought we were going to try to combine the various comments that we have into a new draft. And, you know, I think I volunteered to be part of that. We haven't done that yet. But I think, you know, if we are going to put this off until we can have an in-person workshop, we might be waiting a long time. I don't think the restrictions that we're under right now are going to go away anytime soon. I'm afraid that we're going to run right into the season at which, you know, at the time at which we really want to have something in place. So I think we should make some plans to develop a new draft and schedule a public workshop, but do it virtually.
Schedule a public workshop and do it what?
Do it virtually.
Virtually, okay.
Yeah, do like we're doing now.
Yeah, I got that. Believe me, never happy with it. Nobody with workshops are going to be happy with it, but it can be done. But for at least 2 months and maybe a couple months before that, we've had my suggestions that were drawn up in last May. The town manager's reworked suggestions that came originally from Dewey Beach Enterprises. And, you know, everybody slants things their own way, so they have a little bit different slant. And we have comments today from Mr. Lauer and Mr. Kennard from from Dewey Beach Enterprises. So I guess we have to go somewhere with this. I mean, Mr. Persinger, do you want to take what I wrote and the interim rules and merge them together with what you think the rules might be?
And the draft that we had from Scott some time ago. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I think we need to do that and move this along and, you know, plan out what our course is going to be. I mean, I think if we could come back and, you know, maybe in March and have the public workshop, or maybe even February, perhaps, have
Right,
the public workshop.
Yeah, because we have a public hearing now. We want to schedule one for P and Z in January, so that'll take up quite a bit of time then.
Well, is a
I
workshop.
agree that we should have a workshop.
Is a workshop a public hearing and with the same notice requirements?
Different.
Excuse me?
Someone answer that?
No, we've held workshops in the past and we don't advertise them as public hearings. It's a workshop. No,
Yeah, but almost always workshops include the public comment.
Oh, sure. No, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, but there's no vote in a workshop, so I think we're fine to just do it and do it.
There's no what in the workshop?
There's no vote in a workshop.
You're right, unless you schedule one after it.
Well,
Go ahead,
let
Mr.
me-
Persinger.
Let me agree to come
Persinger
back
and then
with
Mr. Bauer.
Let me come back and agree to have a draft for the January meeting, and then we can decide on timing for a workshop if people choose to do so at that point.
Yeah, because, I mean, you all already have all the comments that I made. What I did was merge all what I thought were the proper rules, merge that Bayside Beach into the ocean side, like was suggested by Mr. Kennard. And what our former town manager and DBE did, DBE sent some things to the former town manager, then the former town manager reworked them and put them up as comments from him. And those were, it says draft for discussion in red that you all got. So I mean, I've already said what I think. I think, how about we have all the other commissioners send in what they think to Commissioner Persinger and he pull it together. Mr. Bauer, you had your hand up. I apologize.
Yeah, I just have a couple questions for amongst us. Is our intentions to have a lifeguard there 7 days a week?
It wasn't mine. We did it during the weekends. Am I right, Fred?
Right.
I mean,
Yes,
Mr. Dede.
that's correct.
Mr. Dede.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not a proponent of having rules that we're never going to enforce because there's no one there to enforce it. So, you know, let's try to have some if we're going to have some rules, then we're going to have
Well, we don't have
enforce.
people on every street every day to enforce stuff either. So
Right.
Or
No,
they
but I
come
mean, we have
and go.
enough lifeguards on the ocean to enforce the rules. But yeah, I mean, I have a lot of comments on it, but yeah, I mean, we need to know, you know, if we're going to put something in place, we're going to have some enforcement of it. So, I mean, that's the first, you know, that's really my main, question,
I agree.
how we're going to do it.
So any other comments or suggestions? Then we'll send it to Mr. Persinger and see if he wants to merge the ones together. And Mr. Persinger, I'll make myself available at any time, but you have all the comments that I wrote. I mean, there's 2 pages of them, so.
Right. Okay, that's fine.
All right, Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, just a quick comment of clarification. It seems like there's rules already in place at the Bay Walk, or am I just inferring that is that not true
As
that there
far
aren't?
as I know, we haven't organized any rules.
It's
Okay.
all been, it's been informal at this.
So it's all
point.
been informal. I mean, I didn't see any kegs on the beach last time I was out there. So that's why, or the Bay Beach, that's why I was curious if there any.
Well, the
anything's happening.
Hyatt, Vince DeFonso really does take a lot of interest in this and really monitors the beach very well. So he's very concerned, and he's the one who says, look, I'm here every day. I look to see what goes on. And he's really pushing hard to get some rules, especially for the Bay Walk area.
But
Okay.
But
we'll
it's
find
worked
out.
out, it worked out fine this past year. So
We'll find out very quickly if somebody's sued, who's responsible for the beach and the Bay Walk, and it'll be the town.
I think so.
Mr. Bauer?
Yeah, just one quick question. Have we gotten any complaints from, I mean, we've had informal rules back there. If we had any complaints that came in from it?
The only complaint we had to deal with dog and.
Yeah, I had 2 complaints to me about dogs
So the dogs have been the 3 complaints
And-
we've gotten?
and selling things on the beach.
Okay.
So that's all.
Dogs and selling stuff on the beach.
Any other comments? Anything else? All right. Interim town manager comment.
I have only one question. It's kind of a situation that comes up periodically. We get property owners, and I've gotten some property owners that want streetlights installed in their streets. And it seems like a small issue, but once we get involved in getting a streetlight installed, depending on how the process, which is another issue, there's a perpetual cost that the town has to pick up. There's no real guidance on this. I've had some queries on Reed Avenue that they would like to get a street light installed on Buena. Most of the residents seem to be okay with it, but I don't feel comfortable approving something that I think I'm opening up Pandora's box here. I know some years ago, we did have under a former public safety committee, a survey done in the community throughout Dewey. And it was kind of all over the place. Some people really liked it, and a lot of people did not like streetlights on their street. So I think I just need a little direction as far as, how much would you want the town manager to get involved in these issues? And since we don't really have a process, and it is kind of an administrative issue, but there's a dollar attached to this. Now, on a personal note, I have to say I've got property on Clayton Street, and our tenant wanted a beach light installed, and I said, you do it on your own, and he did. So that's a private thing, and it's paid for. And some people do it privately, so we don't really have any direction as to what do we publicly take care of versus do we want the street owners themselves to pick up the tab? So that's just a concern that's come up. Don't expect an answer today, but just wanted to let you know that that's come up.
Well, I'm going to allow the commissioner, or not allow, I apologize, ask the commissioner to make comments, but I'm going to comment. You understand that it's an expense to the town. You have to decide whether you want the town to accept that. It's not horrendous, but it's in perpetuity. So it becomes a significant number in the long haul. You have to understand that if you want the town to take up that mantle, then we'll put it on the agenda and vote on it. And if you don't, you have to think about people will complain to you if they want lights, and they'll sure as heck complain. And I know for sure that they'll complain if they get lights and they don't like them. So, when they did the survey, when there was a committee that did a survey on it, Jim is right, it was all over the place. There were people that said, what the hell, that's what the town should do, put them up everywhere. There were other people that said, don't put it near my house. So it was always not in my backyard. So Mr. Jasinski, you had a comment?
Well, the first half of my comment is somewhat like a question, which is, what is the cost either per light or per town block to have lights? And the second part of my question, which is really a comment, is whatever we do, I think it should be a uniform policy. We shouldn't make the decision one way for one block and another way for another block. If we survey the residents on a block and say, if majority of the people answer and say they want it or don't want it, that's what we go with. Maybe that's fine, but we shouldn't be kind of just winging it. We should do it the same way for everybody, whether they get them or they don't get them.
Gotcha. Let me go to Mr. Stevens, but before that, have Mr. Dedes answer the cost per month per light.
The lights that are being put up that we've seen where we've replaced ones that we already are involved in that we've been paying, we've converted them over to Cobra lights, and they're running about $16, $17 a month.
Per light.
Yeah, per light.
Okay, so that adds up if it does the whole town.
Correct.
Mr. Stevens, go ahead.
What's the cost? Two things. One, Jim, what is the cost of installing a new light and running the electricity like the one on Reed once?
If there's already a connection to it, there's no cost. And if there's a pole already set up, Jim Smith, who's our government liaison with Delmarva Power, says they will do it for free.
I'll tell you, gentlemen, and Ashley, my concern of lights is kind of like the whole 5G concern. The 50% are gonna love it, and 50% are gonna hate it. And I think we're opening a Pandora's box on it personally.
Anybody else want to make comment?
Yeah, just a quick comment. No one wants that light by their house. That's for certain. But, lights have a way of, cutting back on bad behavior for people. When the street's lit, you're less likely to do something out in the open than when you're in the dark. So, I think from a public safety standpoint, it's something it's nice to have, and especially if it doesn't cost as much money. I understand that residents don't like them right next to their house. People like to sleep without the light shining in their bedroom.
Well, Mr. Dedes is asking for advice. My personal advice is the town should not get involved in it. It's going down the road. It'll end up being a hell of an expense. And at least 50% of the people are going to be disgusted. Let's go right down the line here. Mr. Bauer, what do you think? Yes or no? Should the town get involved in it?
Let's stay out of it.
Mr. Stevens,
Stay out of it.
Mr. Jazinski,
Unless there's a clamoring of residents who want it, we should stay out of it.
Mr. Persinger.
You're on mute, Gary.
I'm sorry, I can't, your mic, there you go.
I'm honestly, I have not thought carefully about this issue at all. So I really don't want to offer an opinion at this time.
You don't want to, okay, very good. Well, that 4 of us have offered opinion, as I see, stay out of it, and 1 no opinion. So Jim, you've got your advice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Bauer, final comments.
No comments at this point.
Commissioner Jazinski, final comments.
No.
Commissioner Persinger, final comments.
No comments.
Commissioner William Bill Stevens.
Yeah, I don't know how that ever started. No comments.
No comment. The only comment I have, Ashley, did we have anybody online that wanted to make comments? I wanted to make sure I covered that because people say I forget all the time.
No one is on the line.
Okay, very good. Well, my only comment is I really appreciate all that you all have done today. We're 2 minutes over the 2.5-hour mark. And I think we handled a great meeting at a great time, and I appreciate all your efforts. Thank you very much. And Mr. Persinger, I'll be talking to you about the Bay Beach rules.
Sounds good.
Thank you all.